Hi, I'm Jodi Carlton, a neurodiverse relationship expert. And while I usually talk about adult partner relationships, today I want to talk about why parenting a neurodivergent child of any age, baby, toddler, teen, adult, can be really exhausting and hard. I am neurodivergent myself. I'm ADHD. I have an autistic daughter and an ADHD son. And we have a lot of neurodivergent family members as well. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of those challenges are and why it can be so exhausting for everybody, but you particularly as a parent. But first, as always, if you're benefiting from the content on this channel, please be sure to like and subscribe because that will help YouTube know that you want to get more content like this. Okay, so I want to go through chronologically, developmentally, what it's like to raise neurodivergent children. And so let's start with the baby years. Those years are blurred for me because my autistic daughter had a lot of sensory needs. She was orally defensive. I'd never even heard of sensory processing disorder until we had specialists involved because she had developmental delays and had trouble learning how to eat, had trouble learning how to speak. So we had speech therapists, we had occupational therapists, and she almost had to have a feeding tube because her brain couldn't interpret certain textures of food and she would gag, and it was just exhausting. In those toddler years with her, there were doctor's appointments and evaluations, and it was very stressful, and there was a lot of fear about her needs and her development. And she wasn't diagnosed as autistic until she was 5, but we already were seeing some of the developmental difficulties for her. My son, who was eventually diagnosed as ADHD, but not until he was in high school, actually had seizures. He developed epilepsy when he was not quite 2 years old, and he did not sleep through the night until he was 2 years old. He had a lot of acid reflux and gastrointestinal issues, and this is all very common for neurodivergent children. And so parents oftentimes are being advocates and researchers and investigators and having to get their children the medical care that they need. The rate of seizures in neurodivergent individuals is higher than the general population. There's also a lot more allergies, food allergies, not just foods, but other types of things. So as a parent, this can be really exhausting. And if you are also in a neurodiverse partnership with a spouse who's autistic, or maybe you're the autistic partner, or your spouse may be ADHD or neurotypical, then you're also dealing with difficulties in understanding each other as well, with the ways your brains work and communication. And so this can become so exhausting. I can remember, I have trouble remembering actually those years of my life and my marriage because I was literally just in survival mode so much during those years and not getting enough sleep myself. And it starts a debt snowball of energy and lack of sleep. My children are in college now, and I'm just now starting to catch up on sleep from the last 20 years. So it's been exhausting, and I know a lot of you can relate to that. Now, next are the school age years. And so this is where your advocacy as a parent continues because oftentimes children are not in school systems that really are supportive of neurodiversity and different types of accommodations, whether your child has sensory needs or developmental delays. I know my daughter needed to be pulled out for math classes. She was so overwhelmed by timers on tests. She's very intelligent. Intelligence is not the issue for a lot of neurodivergent children. It's more processing and anxiety. The neurodivergent brain, especially the autistic brain, is already a hypervigilant brain because there's so many sensory demands that are overwhelming. And so they'll oftentimes look like they're having behavioral meltdowns or tantrums. They may be misdiagnosed as oppositional defiant. My daughter actually had that diagnosis at one point, which was a wrong diagnosis. And fortunately, I already knew she was autistic, and I knew that this provider had really misinterpreted what they were seeing. And so what happened with me is what happens with a lot of parents. I had a counseling practice at the time, and I ended up having to leave work because my children's father, we were still married at that time, was our primary breadwinner, and he traveled a lot. And my children had so many needs between their appointments. They still had occupational therapy and speech therapy and sleep studies and EEGs because of the seizures. And then a lot was going on in the school with my daughter as well when she started school, that I needed to be in meetings a lot there for IEP meetings. I ended up leaving my career for about 5 years just to be a full-time mom so I could be in the school constantly advocating for my children. And I ended up homeschooling for about 3 years, which I had never planned to do. A lot of you watching this video are probably choosing to homeschool, and I am not judging anybody. Whatever your choice is, it's very personal, and it really depends on your resources and your ability to do that. At that time, this was 10, 15 years ago, homeschooling was not as common, and it's become a lot more common now. But this is something that a lot of families end up doing because their children's needs are not able to be met in the school system. And neurodivergent children sometimes are more susceptible to bullying as well. And my daughter had some difficulties with that when she got into 4th grade, where girl drama was a big deal. And so we ended up homeschooling. And that, as you might imagine, was very exhausting for me because I didn't know I was ADHD at the time. I was in a marriage that I talk about a lot on this channel, which was really spiraling into high conflict and difficulty because we just didn't understand each other at all. And then I was full-time homeschooling my children, and I ended up developing health problems as well, autoimmune issues, which there's a very high rate of autoimmune challenges for mothers of neurodivergent children, mothers of autistic children. That's not to say that you dads are not really involved in your children's lives, but oftentimes, like me, dads are primary breadwinners, whereas moms end up becoming the household managers, the children managers, the advocates, and their own health just really takes a back seat. And that was certainly the case for me. And again, just exhausting. In these early years, the school age years, this is also when you're doing a lot of advocating and defending your children to family members, other family members, friends, neighbors who don't really understand your child, don't understand your child's behaviors, maybe your child's social awkwardness. I know that some of my family members didn't understand my daughter's behaviors and thought of her as just being a child who just misbehaved a lot. And so there's a lot that can be challenging there, especially if some family members have old school methods of disciplining, and you get a lot of advice that's really not helpful because people don't really understand what you're dealing with. And sometimes you as parents don't really know what you're dealing with either. And there's the stress of, am I making the right choices? Am I ruining my child with the choices I'm making? And again, so the stress is just huge. And this just contributes to that overall exhaustion, this fight that you have to help the world understand your child. And oftentimes you're translating the world for your child as well. You're teaching them how to interpret social interactions with other children and just helping them in being appropriate in social settings. And really what we're doing is teaching our children to mask, which can be really exhausting and harmful for neurodivergent children and adults. However, it is important that we learn how to be appropriate in the way that is expected by society, even if it doesn't feel internally or intrinsically natural. So it is an important tool and an important skill to learn. And as parents, we're teaching our children those things. And sometimes we don't really understand the social expectations ourselves. Okay, moving on into the teen years. And if you have more than one neurodivergent child, oftentimes you've been really focusing on each of them and each of their needs. And sometimes that balance is hard to find, and their own relationship with each other can be really difficult and challenging. I actually have a podcast episode in season 3, I think it is, of my podcast. And there's a playlist here called Your Neurodiverse Relationship. It's my podcast playlist where I talk to my own children about their relationship as siblings. So if you haven't seen that, be sure and go check that out. But into the teen years, so we start dealing with physical changes, physiological changes, hormonal changes, and brain development that starts to really manifest in the frontal lobes of the brain. So we're learning how to, at that age, we're learning how to regulate our emotions, how to even understand them. Our executive functions are developing. So our ability for abstract reasoning and problem solving, time management, even social skills are still continuing to develop. All of these things are developing in all teenager brains, but a neurodivergent brain oftentimes is a bit delayed. And so you'll start to see some of that development as behind peer groups, which can then also lead to more social isolation. And dating is usually later for autistic individuals, not always for ADHD, but sometimes. So this can create a divide for your children in their social interactions with peers. And as a parent, you're trying to help them navigate that and also navigate your own relationship with their parent within your marriage or your partner relationship, and also perhaps navigate your own neurodiversity. And then, of course, the teenage years also brings about the normal teenage stuff where there's this individuation, is what we call it in psychology, where we really start to recognize that we are separate from our parents, that our beliefs can be different, our values can be different. And that means rejecting parental values, rebelling against parental rules. And this is the hard part of raising a teenager for all parents. Going through that with a neurodivergent child can be exceptionally hard for lots of different reasons, depending on your child's personality, which is a totally different thing that's developing that's unrelated to neurotype. And so there's just a lot in figuring out the boundaries and the rules that to set for children, what they can handle in terms of household chores and responsibilities at home. So there's a balancing act there of figuring out what their capacity is without overwhelming them, how to discipline. And again, going back, it's exhausting. Now, the one perk about teenage years is you get to sleep a little bit more sometimes, because you got those teenagers that oftentimes will sleep in late. At least that's the way it was for me. My children definitely are late night owls. They stay up late and then they sleep in. So here's where you get to catch up on a little bit of rest. And I really do strongly encourage you as parents to give your children as much responsibility as they can handle. If they can fix their lunch for school, have them fix it. If they can fix their own breakfast, have them do it. And believe that they can do more than they will let you think. Autistic individuals and ADHD tend to be outsourcers. In other words, if they can get you to do it, they're absolutely going to get you to do it. And whether that's the right thing to do or the responsible thing to do, outsourcing is actually a very important tool that neurodivergent individuals use to guard their energy. It's a form of resource guarding because the neurodivergent brain has less energy because there are already so many more demands that the brain has. So the neurodivergent brain resource guards. This is what leads to something called PDA, which is pervasive drive for autonomy. Some people call it pathological demand avoidance. It's not really about just being a slacker or lazy. It's more about resource guarding. So in all stages of development, you may find that your neurodivergent children will outsource to you. So learning how to set those boundaries is very important once they get old enough to self-care, to take care of themselves and take care of their own, their clothes, their laundry, their whatever. As a parent, you're teaching them to be adults, successful adults. So you want to give them as much responsibility as possible. But teenagers for sure will definitely try to push back and give you the responsibility back. So again, exhausting. So now as your children move into young adulthood, this is the stage of parenting that I'm in right now. As I'm making this video, I have an 18-year-old and a 22-year-old. And so they're basically, both my kids are in college. Some of you will have kids that don't go to college. Some of you will. But either way, they're transitioning into adulthood, which means they're legally allowed to do things that they couldn't do before. So as a parent, you don't have as much control over your children. And it's not about controlling them, but it's about the ability to help make sure they're safe. And this can be really scary as a parent because you can't always make sure they're safe. And your children oftentimes are delayed in developing those executive functions. Sometimes even safety awareness can be something that hasn't fully developed in a lot of neurodivergent young adults. So just even knowing how to be safe in dating, in driving a car, all sorts of things. So as a parent, you're navigating that with them, figuring out when are they ready to learn how to drive? Are they ready to go live independently, to go away to college or stay home and go to a local community college or a local university? A lot of neurodivergent children need extra time for their brains to get caught up with executive functions before they go and live away from home. Others are ready. It just really depends on your child. But again, you're navigating all of that with them and trying to manage yourself, perhaps your own career, your own relationship. And it is so important, as you can imagine. We're well into 20 years of raising a neurodivergent child that has at times been very exhausting. So through the years, it's important to develop your own self-care habits so that you have time to recharge and take care of yourself, take care of your health, and also enjoy your family, enjoy your children. It can sometimes become such a consuming task to just be a parent. It's important to make sure you're figuring out how to enjoy each other, how to have fun together, how to spend time together where you have mutual interest. And the same is true for your marriage or your adult partner relationship. Now, as some of you have neurodivergent children who move on into adulthood, some struggle to ever leave home and be independent. And I just want to emphasize, this is such an important thing to focus on. You really don't want to be complacent about your adult children living at home with you. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. This can be really difficult for a lot of neurodivergent adults. I'm speaking mostly to those of you who have children who can eventually live independently. Temple Grandin, who is one of the most famous autistic individuals in the world, called this the loving push. And if you haven't read her book called The Loving Push, you need to go read it, because she really talks about how important it is to really push your teenagers, your young adults, your older adults to be independent. It's critical. It's critical for them, and it's critical for you, because you are going to be exhausted and burned out at this point after raising your children. And I don't want them to sound like little parasites. It's not like that. Raising children is exhausting for all parents. But for parents with neurodivergent children, it's particularly exhausting and challenging. And your life matters too. Their life matters. But the goal of growing up is independence. And so you want to try to help them be as independent as possible. And then you really want to cut those apron strings so that you have a chance to recover and heal from your own burnout, so that you can then thrive in your middle age or retirement years. Again, this is the stage that I'm not quite to yet, but I'm working with my children to choose vocations and degrees and majors in college that will help them be independent adults, that will help set them up to earn a good living. I will always be available to them as a parent to help them learn how to manage their money. Just recently, I signed my son's car over to him, and he has his own insurance policy that he's paying, and he's had jobs that he has to help contribute financially. And I did the same with my daughter a couple of years ago. So you want to teach them to be more and more independent, which means you have to stop being in the driver's seat, to use a metaphor there, quite as much, and really focus on your own recovery. I know for me, I went from being an extrovert as a young adult to an introvert who really just does not want to do anything but sit and binge Netflix after work every day. And that's okay for me right now, because I'm just resting and recovering. And I love my kids. I want to say, I've loved every stage of raising my kids. I've loved seeing their special superpowers, I call them. They both have exceptional skills in certain areas. So along with the challenges, it has been such a joy to parent. And so I think making sure you notice and pay attention to the joys along the way is also so important to helping with burnout. And it's so important to help you feel connected to your children and to help them feel connected to you as well. So I'm just going to wrap up and say, hopefully some of this has resonated with you, no matter what stage you're in. Maybe you have adult children who are raising their own neurodivergent children. And again, going back to self-care, you want to be making sure that you're taking care of yourself and learning as much as you can about neurodivergence for them, for you. Follow channels like me. There are other people out there who are autistic and ADHD who are helping people learn about what that's like for them. And so be sure and connect with other channels like that can help you understand what you're experiencing even more and also help you learn about self-care. So again, please don't forget to subscribe and follow my channel if you're finding this content useful.